How do you find happiness after a heartbreaking loss? How do you reinvent yourself after your life breaks? How do you find a sense of purpose after a tragedy? My guest today has answered these questions with her life and her work. Karen Guggenheim is a pioneer in the global happiness movement. She's a leader in promoting the science behind well-being at scale. And she's an amazing motivational speaker who inspires people, including me, how to grow past trauma and rebuild a life focused on meaning, purpose, and happiness. I'm not going to read the whole bio for Karen. We'll put it in the show notes because we'll be here for half an hour if I go through all of her achievements. But I do want to mention that in addition to being the creative force behind the World Happiness Summit, which is a leading well-being conference that promotes benefits of increasing happiness and well-being, Karen has a book coming out later this fall in October that's called Cultivating Happiness. And again, we'll include the link for that in the show notes. But with that, Karen, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Nataly. What a nice introduction. Okay, I'm done. Bye, everyone. Bye-bye. I'm so happy to be here with you.
We'd be here for a really long time. So Karen, you and I have gotten to know each other a little bit. We're not fans of small talk. We just dive right in. So I want to dive right in. Your reinvention journey began about 10 years ago after your husband suddenly died in 2013. And when we chatted before, I said to you, Karen, that is such an awful tragedy. And here you are leading a happiness movement. So can you talk about how you went from that awful tragedy to making the choices and the decisions that bring you here to do what you're doing?
So interesting because every time I talk about it, it's a new, it's almost like a new page or a new piece of the experience comes to light, I guess. As I evolve, I can see different things. And for me, it was really survival, the choice to survive. I was kind of looking out for anything like what is it going to be the piece that is going to stay there, is going to give me the stability. So I was grappling at straws that would break, and I'm like, give me something. And for some reason, for me, it was like, okay, I'm going to be happy, because of my kids. So my inclination was to just shut down. But I have, two amazing, wonderful, amazing, beautiful, smart, generous, kind young men now. And at the time, I knew they needed me. And so I knew that I had to show up to my life. I couldn't retreat into what I wanted to do, which is just to check out, put the AC really cold in the bedroom, get into the sheets, put the blinders on, and that's it, cruise control. And so I was like, what can I do that's going to be worth my while? And I'm like, okay, I'm going to be happy. Yeah. No idea. I didn't understand the science. I didn't know that it was an internal job. I didn't, not to understand the science, I didn't know there was a science. But intuitively, I'm like, it's going to have to be great. And I'm going to have to figure out how to make it great. Because I need to be there for this really hard experience for my kids. And so I need to put myself okay for me to be able to nourish and really give them this source of abundance after this horrible tragedy that I couldn't do anything about, right? And so I embarked on this journey to happiness, as we know now that happiness is inside and you're not happy all the time. It's about being happier. But I also knew that the first step was feeling the pain. And that is like a huge bummer. It's a huge bummer because to get to the other side, you got to go through. And you can't go above it. You can't go under it. You have to go through the fire. And my suiting up to that experience was purpose and meaning. What can I control? What can I control? What purpose and meaning I'm going to make meaning out of this? It's going to give my life's purpose. I don't know what that is at the moment, but I'm going to happiness. It's going to be happy. I'm going to be happy, you know,
So, Karen,
and
can I just
that's it.
ask you about that? I want to interrupt you for a moment because I think for many people listening to this, it might seem almost, I'm going to use this word, I don't mean this in a harsh way, but it might seem almost absurd that you go through this tragedy, right? And then you decide that you're going to be happy. So it's this, I think it's like this heroic decision, but it almost seems odd. Had you always been kind of optimistic, forward-looking person before that? Was this something in your nature that kind of led you to make that, again, I think heroic decision?
Well, thank you for saying that, Natalie. But no, kind of zero on the optimism. I grew up. I was born in Nicaragua,
Mm,
the challenging country, and I saw a lot of different things in my childhood and experienced different things. So it was not like a very happy uh, place to grow up in a way. Some things were joyful, but it was complicated, and so I didn't really have this natural optimistic, happy outlook. Um, what I will say is that I was always oppositional. So, okay, here is devastation. Oh, I'm going to change it into the opposite. And I've always been analytical. So I use my strengths, right? And so to
mm,
me, I was like, okay, I can cry every single moment of my life, every single moment, talk about it, talk about it, talk about it. Now I talk about it, but it's like it drives me. But I could talk about it from pitying myself, how unfair there were mistakes made at the hospital. Like I could just talk about these things forever, and it wouldn't get me anywhere.
mm,
My husband will never come back. My family, the way it was, and my plans and our plans in the future and what we thought will never be there. They'll never happen. And so, what can I do with that reality? It is a hard reality. I think that also based on, again, my childhood, I saw a lot of realities that were kind of like, ooh, okay, that's poverty. That's
yeah,
people
yeah.
that don't have shoes, right? Who are begging on the street and so forth. So it was a very realistic place to wait
Hmm.
to grow up. And so with all that, and for me, I have never had a more real experience than being in the room where my husband died and having all the people in the
Yeah.
ICU and tried to resuscitate. It was like hyper realism.
Mm,
We've talked about people facing issues in their lives, and they're like, oh my god, you go into this moment where you're it's interesting because you're so fully alive, but you're facing something so scary at the same
yeah.
time. And that's what I felt. So I think I've been courageous. That's another
Mm,
strength that I have. So I went into courage. I went into part of my decision making process when I chose happiness. I also chose that I was going to be the hero of my life. I wasn't
mm,
going to be a victim. I would not be identified as a widow. I became a widow, but I'm not, I don't feel like I am a widow.
yeah.
Even when I write it down, and I don't know why, when you go to the doctor, whatever, it's like single, married, widow. Why can't I
Yeah.
just be single?
Yeah.
Why do I
Yeah.
have to constantly, mention that? I don't,
Yeah.
I don't understand that. So I wouldn't be a victim. I chose to be a hero, and
Yeah.
so that's the arc.
Well, there's a couple of things in what you just shared and then just getting to know you even before this, that really like they stand out so clearly for me. One is the power of choice, right? I think that maybe the greatest power we have is the choices that we make, right? Including the story we tell ourselves about things that happen, good or bad, right? Who we are. And like, again, I am just so, I find it a heroic choice to say, as you said, this is awful. I'm not denying the pain, but my life as I knew it is over, like radical acceptance. And I'm now going to choose, which again, like that's an act of heroism to me. Amidst the tragedy, I'm going to choose to move forward. I'm going to choose happiness. So that's one thing that I think is just like such the underlying, um, like part of your heroic journey. And the second piece is what you just talked about is choosing the story you tell about yourself, because you could take the story of pain and being the widow and loss, and that could just be the story. I mentor a lot of leaders and high achievers, and we've all gone through difficult things in our lives. And I'm of the camp, like, let's not compare our struggles. Once you go through something difficult, it's difficult.
Absolutely.
And many of them, after we work together, they realize that their biggest blocker is that they're still defining themselves with the loss they experienced or the failure. They haven't chosen a new story. And that's something you did.
Yes. I chose the protagonist, which I was starring in this. Before I dedicated my life to this, I'm in communications, a former journalist. So I'm a natural storyteller. So where I am not a widow, I am a storyteller. And so I was like, okay, who are we casting for this?
I love it.
Okay, you're going to be the lead. And this is so not what I would like to do with my life. And so I'm so happy to be in this podcast with you, and brilliant that you're, taking this concept of reinvention, because I literally reinvented myself like that. Okay, who are the characters and what are we going to do? 4 months after he died, I was getting an MBA at Georgetown.
Wait, hold on. So 4 months after your husband dies, you decide to go get an MBA. Had you thought about getting an MBA before?
No. I already had a master's in communications, and my husband was the one that was, primarily in charge of our finances. Mm-hmm. So I always worked, but it was like projects that I enjoyed doing, like, intellectually. And so that was never my responsibility, as it were. Directly, of course, it's my responsibility, but you know what I'm saying. Sure, he was doing more of the heavy load of what comes in, and I was doing the more important work, which is raising the kid, everything else, and working. Yeah, but it wasn't like, okay, I'm not concerned that much as to where the income is coming, because I have this partner who's taking care of that, and so that was gone as well. And I knew I needed to be with people. That's another bit that's really important. In my retreat, that I wanted to not be with anybody, I understood that where I was going, I was going to have to change, right? That's something else that we have to, you have to be willing to change. If you're not willing to change, and I'm saying change the way you think, change the way you feel, change, it might be the way you dress, I don't know, but you're going to have to be willing to make some changes. Yeah. Otherwise, you're not going to go anywhere. And you're going to have to move. Physically, mentally, you have to move. You have to poor me. No, not poor me. This happens to all kinds of people, in different ways. Like you mentioned, the challenges. And so, my story with Georgetown, actually, I really wanted to go after I graduated high school, and I didn't get in. I was waitlisted, and then I was married very young. And I got accepted as a transfer student. But then I decided, my husband was 11 years older and he asked me to marry him. So I got married because, again, in my fixed mindset, wife can't be at Georgetown.
Right.
Why?
Right.
I have no idea. I went to UM and it was fine. And I got a master's and I did all these different things. But I had a mindset that just said that from somewhere. And part of the legacy building or meaning making that I embarked on after he died was, okay, I didn't go to Georgetown because I got married. Now I'm going to go to Georgetown is in homage to him. I'm going to show beautiful. That I can do this for him. This pain, disappointment. The disappointment is like huge. That I didn't get what I wanted, right? Didn't get the life I wanted. I'm going to transform it. Some people have said, oh, you're like an alchemist. And that's
I didn't want to interrupt you, but now I literally am biting my tongue and listening to you and wanting to say alchemy, right? From a black rock, from a really dark matter, you chose, and it wasn't some magic, just like alchemy is not actual magic. Alchemists back in the times, they worked very hard and for a very long time and often didn't succeed for many times, but you chose everything you just said and more to alchemize that into a
Yes.
sense of purpose. And I think it's so beautiful, Karen. Yeah, I don't know if I knew that before, if you'd said it, that to do it in his legacy. I think that's
No,
really
no,
beautiful.
it was something because he was a scientist, he was a physician, he was a neurosurgeon, so he was very much into excellence and learning, and so I was like, okay, I'm gonna go do this, and it's I don't think I've talked about it before. I think it's in my book maybe, but it was my private um, motivation for him
Mm.
because also I didn't want his story to be he died and the family's destroyed and the kids are a mess and the wife used to be so vibrant and the wife is, like you
Yeah,
can't
yeah,
you
yeah.
don't want to see this girl, you know. And so I thought that was terribly unfair that he died so young, and so I wanted it to be something that, like, because this person was in my life and this person loved me so much. And this person was such a loving father and a friend and just like such an amazing man that I'm going to put the mantle on that I can show that in action. Like, this is
Mm.
love. This is how I was loved. So I can pay it
That's really
forward.
beautiful. That's really beautiful. Okay, so you went to get your MBA,
I
and
went to get
now
my
tell us how you
MBA.
go from that to creating something that is
Yeah.
helping tens of thousands of people live happier lives, not just you.
So, during the process, I started copying what happy people do, right?
Mm.
And so I'm like, okay, they smile at a joke. And I remember it was about a year after he died, and somebody said something really funny in my program. And I was like analyzing, like, that's really funny. But can a widow laugh? Like, I'm having this internal conversation, like,
Oh.
can I laugh?
Mm.
And in the same way that I totally disagree with toxic positivity, like, oh, it'll be fine. Why aren't you
Yeah,
happy?
yeah,
You have everything, you know?
yeah.
Oh my God. So the opposite is true too. Like, if it's funny, I should be able to laugh because that's natural and that's my reaction. So I said, okay, I'm going to laugh. And that
Mm.
doesn't mean I'm not going to cry. So I learned that I could have like opposite emotions at the same time, and through this. And so I started being with friends, and happy people say yes to go out to dinner or laugh or dance, or so I started doing all those things, and I'm like, oh,
Mm.
that feels nice. And then of course we know that, from research, that when we are with friends, there's biology that's going on
Yes.
that reinforces you feeling well, and secretion of hormones and all these things. And I've been doing yoga for I don't know how long, decades. So that also helped me during that time. And then I became happy. I was like really happy.
Mm.
And then I landed this really good job on paper in communications when I graduated. And the job, actually, I could do it very well, but it didn't have like purpose,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so one of the things with, that you experience with post traumatic growth is that you redefine your life. And so I'm like, I didn't survive my husband's death so that I can go into a job that I have no sense of purpose. And so, and during that time, as things were, I mean, I met a group of volunteers that were talking about putting on an event called the World Happiness Summit. And and then I was like, oh, that's nice. And then I heard the motto, I choose happiness. And then I was like, wait a second, I did that. Like, I actually did that. That's not just a saying.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
did, that was a process. And so I educated myself on the science of happiness, and I read several books, and I talked to people. 6 weeks later, I quit my job and I
Another
put all my
reinvention.
and that was it. So I became a social entrepreneur, and I created the company to put on the summit about 5 months later, 6 months later, and it was kind of like, if you build it, will they come? Because I created the experience that I wanted for me to have had
Mm.
if I needed if I,
Yeah.
in my
Yeah.
brokenness, I'm still broken, but I'm more put together. And could there be, first of all, I wanted to share that happiness is possible in the way that we define happiness, right? That doesn't mean you're not going to be unhappy,
That's
because
right.
that's natural and normal. And if something bad happens, it's healthy to have a normal reaction to it, but that we can learn ways that we can navigate our life that are more positive, build more resilience, are more enriching, you live healthier as well, and et cetera, et cetera. And so I wanted as many people as possible to know that that was available to them. And I wanted it to be in a setting that was also fun, to make learning
Yeah.
fun, and for us
Yeah.
to build community. And it's so funny because Reinvention, I wasn't like into like, let's all come together and hi everybody, like at all. Like
Yeah.
I was a tomboy. I was fierce as a kid.
Yeah.
I like stories from my childhood. I think people were, afraid to invite my mother because I would come with. Um, but here I was into this new world that because of the post-traumatic growth, that I
Yeah.
became somebody new. And I wanted people desperately to be happy,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Karen, I think it's so beautiful. You've mentioned post-traumatic growth a few times. So I want to talk about it because it's something that um, I think is, I think it's a very, I think most people know what it is, right? So post-traumatic growth is when you go through a traumatic event, like losing a loved one or a serious health issue or losing your home. And as a result, you expand, you grow in your purpose and your fulfillment and your unique gifts. And it is something that I still feel like we don't talk about enough, because I believe that every single human being has the ability to grow through challenges. In fact, I think this is why we are who we are, right? If you look back at our thousands of years, everything was challenging, right?
Yeah.
First, it was like, let's not get eaten by the
Yeah.
predators. Where do we get food?
Let's
How do
go
we
get a
survive?
berry.
It was the whole thing is challenging. And yet I find, and I'm definitely going to get myself into hot water with this podcast, and that's my
Uh-oh.
purpose, I guess. I find that we increasingly live in a world where we have fear of hard things. My daughter is 20. I think you and I have talked about this, Mia, and she knows she is going to be appearing on this podcast through me all the time. It's something I talk about with her a lot, that I find, I think her generation, they're brilliant, Karen. They have so many ideas. They're so self-aware. Like, I had none of her self-awareness at 20. But one thing I do find is that I find them often a bit fragile. Like, they're afraid of hard things. They think hard things will break them. They're doing them, but the mindset is this
Mm-hmm.
fear. And so I think that we need to really talk about this ability that we all have, that you literally exemplify in your being, to grow through challenges, to actually not just, you also mentioned resilience. My favorite definition of resilience is not that we can bounce back after something hard, but resilience is your ability to positively adapt amidst adversity. So I think this ability that we have to grow. And as I listen to you, it's like this beautiful case study. Like you said, I became someone new. My sense, if I may, is that you just uncovered more of your dimensions because you chose to grow. You chose to expand. You chose hopefulness, right? We talked about it.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you could talk about that. Like, I'm really curious, were these, it sounds like, because you said you're very analytical, these were conscious decisions that you made. Can you talk about that? Because I think it's really important for people to hear that you can make those decisions. And then the other thing I'd love for you to talk about that I hadn't heard you say before, that you started copying happy people. And I think it's brilliant, Karen, because I think when we're growing into something else, it's like being a kid. You don't know, how to be that. So how can you start becoming that person if you don't really know how, or you don't feel how,
Or you forget yourself,
or you forget? That's right.
because it's very disorienting when something like this happens. So whether it's you're forced to leave your country,
Mm.
right? We've talked about that. Whether you've had that diagnosis or you've lost a job that you've had that you're identified with for years, or a loved one. For me, my mirror was gone, right? So I'm a wife because I'm married to a husband. Otherwise, I'm not a wife. And so I became not a wife immediately. And I'm like, well, okay. But I didn't realize that I identified myself so much as a wife, because we had a very egalitarian and open conversation. It wasn't like, well, I'm his wife or anything, kind of like that. But inside, and then the future planning and the plans and the things that you think life owes you, right? Because I'm going to sacrifice now because later this is going to happen. So all those different things, um, it is this unfolding, as you're saying, into these other, that's a very nice way to put it, into these other aspects of my personality that perhaps were dormant, that came into play, okay, as a result of what happened, but as a result of, by the way, the first step to hedge towards post-traumatic growth is to know it's possible.
That's right.
So
exactly.
anyone who's listening to this, it's possible. It's possible to grow. You don't have to be totally committed to it, but just know it's possible, and open the window, right? And so when you open the window, then this unfolding, as you were describing, I think those were, I was giving opportunity to those parts of myself to show up, those dimensions that perhaps I hadn't used before for many reasons. And now they were showing up, right? And I think that's a very important piece. And now with the copying of what other people do, so if I didn't remember what laughter was like, I didn't remember hope, or I didn't remember, even friendships, it's a very different thing when you are a couple and you've had friendships for a long time. I was married 21 years. You know how it is. It's like, okay, these are my friends. And all of a sudden those friends are not your friends anymore because it just doesn't fit their life. And sometimes, you know what? People don't know what to say to you. They're uncomfortable. So they see you and they remember him dying. So it's not that they want to turn away from you, is that they're uncomfortable, so they don't want to see you. So then that also kind of increases your loneliness, because your old friends just don't fit anymore, right? So I was copying, not in fake happiness, but the things that I saw that people were authentically being happy. Like, if I want to feel less lonely, then maybe I will say yes when they invite me for the fifth time to dinner. Okay. And not hide, right?
Well, the other part of this, Karen, and that I think is very, very important, that again you're exemplifying, is you took action, right? And it is not possible to grow or reinvent without taking action, imperfect action, right? Like, you didn't say yes right away. It had to be the fifth time. It's been imperfect.
Let me just hold on. Red flag. It's been, and it is still today imperfect.
That's right. Imperfect, but you took the steps. And that's, I think, something that is a huge component of post-traumatic growth. Is, I agree with you 1,000%. We have to believe it is possible, even if we don't know how, and that we have to start taking some steps. They may not be perfect. They may not lead us to the perfect direction, but it creates momentum and openness and possibility and opportunity. And I think it's literally this virtuous cycle, right, that you create.
And you know what, also to your point that you were making earlier about the struggle, see, the what we call imperfection, right? But it's really experience, and humans learn from experience. So as you're going through these things that we categorize as challenges or difficulties or failures even, that's where you are exercising that muscle, So you're exercising that muscle, which will create more muscle, right? And you'll be able to, if you're a runner, you'll be able to run. Or if you want to lift something, you'll be able to do that. If you're a jumper, we understand that in our physical body, but we don't understand that with our emotions and our thoughts. But it's the same thing. So those challenges are actually creating new neural pathways. Like,
Yes.
for example, I hated public speaking. And I'm telling you, I hated it, loathed it. Even at Georgetown, when I was doing the presentations for the class, and my friends from there know that, like, I did not want to. And now I get in front of thousands of people and I'm like totally fine speaking. But I grew into that through a lot of discomfort. And what I think is something that cannot be underestimated is, please, please take time to explore your life's purpose, right? Not
Yeah.
be like, hey, my kids. No, like, go spend some time. What are your values, right?
Mm-hmm.
What are your
Mm-hmm.
values? Are you aligning those values with the work that you do and in your personal life? And what is your purpose? Because if you have that,
Yeah. Yeah.
you have a beacon, you have a comfort, you have
That's
a
right.
pillar.
That's right.
You're
I think
like,
you have a
okay,
lifeline.
you
I
have a
think it,
lifeline. You
like
have a lifeline.
listening to you, Karen, I keep coming back to that, and that feels to me like that was your lifeline. Like that was the thing
100%.
you
It's
were
today my
hanging, like
lifeline. No,
literally
no, no.
lifeline,
Today,
hanging on.
today it's
Yeah.
my lifeline.
Yeah.
It is, because I have to work at it.
Yeah.
Because it's still hard.
Of
It's
course
still
it
hard.
is.
It's still
And I
hard.
think that's the other thing that you said. I want to pull on that as well, because you said it quickly, but I think it's so important. Our ability as human beings to hold many different
Mm-hmm.
emotions at the same time. And I think that's as you were saying, I had this memory I'll just share briefly. My grandmother died 6, 7 years ago, and we were all very, very close. They came with us from Russia. We immigrated. My grandpa was still alive. And, we had the funeral, and then we had everyone came back to my mom's house, all the relatives. And, it was tragic. I mean, yeah, she was 87, but I don't think it matters how old the person was. It was tragic. And she was this incredible, like, matron in our family. And all of a sudden, I realized that I was in this heated, laughter filled argument with my cousins about what was her best cake that she made. She made these unbelievable cakes, like 7-layer Napoleons, like, and we were in this obviously like a joking, but pretty, I held my own. I mean, her Napoleon was the best and I'm correct and all my cousins are
I'm
wrong.
gonna
And
have
you
to
can
try
listen to
that.
this. Now it's on record. And we were laughing and telling stories about she was a perfectionist. If the cake wasn't perfect, she would throw it out.
Yeah.
Can you believe, like, literally bake an entire 7-layer cake, and if it
Wow.
wasn't perfect, and we're laughing. And all of a sudden, I just had this moment of sadness and joy all together. And I felt it. Of course, I was so sad. I was also so happy.
Yeah.
And I think just the way you talked about that, I think that's a really important reminder that post-traumatic growth doesn't mean that all of a sudden you forget all the difficult feelings. They come with you, right? But you add others.
The beautiful thing about that, and I think you'll agree, Natalie, is that now, 6, 7 years out from the loss, it also allows you to think about her in a way that you're nostalgic and happy. And yes, I wish she was here for that, but if you just hold on to the pain, it's very hard to have the experience later.
Yes.
That it's like, oh, but I remember that. Like, a lot of people are concerned about letting go of the pain.
Yes.
Because you think you'll forget.
Yes.
You never forget. You never, ever, ever forget. And the beautiful thing in letting go of the pain is that it creates fertile ground for happiness to blossom in your life. And then you can do tributes to that person,
Yes.
or to that, and you can find ways to honor them. And it's for me, that part has been very, very beautiful.
Well, I feel like your whole journey is this tribute to your husband, especially as you've been talking about, which I think is so beautiful.
What is
I want
funny,
to ask,
I just want to say, he
go
wasn't
ahead.
perfect. He wasn't perfect, and we
But
did
what
not have a
human being
perfect
is?
marriage. We did not have a perfect marriage,
Who does?
but there was love and acceptance, which was
Yeah,
wonderful.
which is so beautiful. Listen,
Yeah.
my husband and I have been married for 23 years. We've been together for 27. Nothing is perfect. Everything is challenging, but that's life,
Yeah.
right? That's life. So I want to ask you this question, Karen. I've been asked this question a lot. Whenever I do a keynote about change or a workshop, this comes up, and I, share my journey of coming here as a refugee, becoming very successful, and then going through this breakdown, burnout, life out, because I was so disconnected from myself. And then I went on this journey like you of really finding my purpose. And people ask me if I think that going through an experience of a crisis of some kind is necessary for reinvention. What do you think?
Gosh, well, I can only tell you my experience, right? So I cannot tell you how other people are wired. But I do think that, in my opinion, the reinvention, it does require a challenge,
Mm,
some sort of challenge. It doesn't have to be perhaps, earth shattering, perhaps. In my case, it was. Otherwise, we tend to, I think, go to the path of least resistance.
yeah, yeah,
And why not? You're mostly okay, things are mostly well, and you know usually the reinvention is because you're pushed to it to learn something new, whether it's at work or your personal life. It's a
yeah,
divorce, you're gonna have to learn how to go on a date again, or
yeah,
you're a widower, like what's that like?
yeah,
It's
yeah,
like all these
yeah,
different things. And if you're in a new role and you want to now, quit business consulting and become a painter, there's a learning curve.
yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah,
I think,
so I think it does require some challenge
yeah,
to overcome.
I agree. My father is a physicist, and I can hear him in my ear, right? An object in motion will tend to remain in motion until a force outside of the object is applied to it, right? Like Newtonian physics. I can hear my dad.
Yes.
But it's actually
Yeah.
true. And I think there's this beautiful quote from a spiritual teacher called Ram Dass, which I'm sure many people have heard of him.
Yes.
And it's in one of his books. I can't remember which one, but he writes, um, suffering is the sandpaper to happiness. And he writes how so many people, we live with some degree of suffering, but we can tolerate it. So we just keep going. We're just like, yep, this is life. I'm just gonna, like, I really hate my job, but it pays me money, so I'm gonna stay. Or I really, really want a more senior role, but I'm too afraid, I'm just gonna stay here. Or I really want to paint, but people will judge me. So we tolerate a certain degree of suffering. And he says it's actually a blessing when your suffering gets unbearable, because then it's the sandpaper. It sandpapers
It
enough
can
to a
be.
point where you have this inner pull for something better. And I think that's so. Yes, that's usually that's how I think about it. We need some kind of sandpaper.
But, you know, I just want to clarify that I don't think that you need suffering for happiness. So, I think that suffering is a natural part of life. It can be a little
Yes.
bit medium or large. So, for those of you who haven't suffered, don't worry. You don't need to go look for it. That life takes care of that all by itself.
Yes.
So, at the same time, you don't, you really don't have to wait, to become happier. You can find ways and fulfillment and with this idea, I think it's the mindset is I can't, like, I am a physicist, I can't be a painter. Physicists are not painters.
That's
Like
right.
when I said to myself, I can't go to Georgetown if I get married, like why?
Mm,
you know and so those are the things that I think are really important. Why, I never thought I would be an entrepreneur. I never thought I would build a movement. I never thought I would write a book. I wanted to write a book, but I didn't think I was gonna, I didn't know how that happened. And actually it happened by showing up. That's another. You don't have to wait and find out. Life doesn't happen like that. Like, here's your toolkit. And when you see in the magazines the toolkits for happiness, the 5 tips, da, 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 no, it's like it's raw, it's
true.
dirty. Get your hands in there, like when you're playing with the sand. So yeah, suffering can bring blessings. I don't, because what happened to with my husband, I don't consider that a blessing.
No, Karen, just not to interrupt
The
you, but just
event
to,
has brought blessings,
yeah.
but it's an event that just happened, and life sometimes just happens.
Yeah.
That's it.
I
Just
think just
happens.
to give props to Ram Dass to make sure that everyone listening understands what he meant with that quote. It's not that happiness requires suffering. It's that when the pain of where we are becomes greater than our fear of moving forward, that's when we shift, right? And so to take like that's right. And like to take the simplest example, if you're in a job that like there's a role in the company. I just had this conversation with someone that this person really wants to apply for, but it's completely outside of what they believe they're qualified for. Again, a story they tell themselves. And they've been in the same role now for a while, but recently they got a new boss and they're not having a good experience with this boss. So all of a sudden the pain is becoming greater than their fear of trying to go for this marketing role. And that's what I think Ram Dass means. It's not finding the silver lining. You and I have talked about it. I hate this idea that everything is some silver lining. Some things are just painful. They're just tragic. And we should be like, yes, it's just sad. It's not
And that's
about
it.
looking for the silver lining.
Yeah.
But it's that when our pain of being where we are becomes greater than our fear of moving forward, we have this opportunity for something new. And it's an opening that it creates.
I agree with that. 100%.
Yeah. Okay. I want to ask you one last question to tell us a little bit about your book that's coming out in October. It's called Cultivating Happiness, Overcome Trauma and Positively Transform Your Life. And then I have a listener question that I want to ask you. But first, tell us a little bit about the book.
Amazing. So the book is it's about my journey, it's about my journey into unfold a little bit of what we talked about. And then I share some of the tips and tools that helped me, some of them that I didn't use, but that I've heard, in my journey on this, I think 8 years of producing the World Happiness Summit, and learning from these amazing experts. And so it's a simple book. It's easy reading. I wanted to share the experience with as many people as possible that you can become happier even in the darkest times. And so there wasn't a book for me written by somebody who had gone through that. And so that's why I wanted to share it. It's been out in Italian, it's been in English in the UK, and now in the US in October. It's also in Spanish in Latin America. So yeah, just that, it's gonna be okay. It's not gonna be perfect, but it's gonna be okay. And I wish people ask me like, what would you ask your like 18-year-old self? And it's like, it's not gonna be what you wanted, but it's gonna be okay, and it's gonna be great.
Yeah, that's beautiful. We'll make sure we'll put a link because you can pre-order the book on Amazon now. So we'll put a link to that in the show notes. All right. So now it is time for our listener question. On every episode, I take a listener question, and here's the question. I'm going to read it so I don't mess it up because the words are actually beautiful. I've just been treated for early breast cancer and have been going through a kind of an existential crisis because of it. What's interesting to me is that my friend is also going through a non-health related crisis, but our questions to ourselves are very similar. Why did this happen? What needs to change in my life as a result? How can I get through this? How can I make this crisis mean something? How can I make it worthwhile? And I feel like this series of questions, Karen, were made for you. And I think you've answered many of them just as we talked. But I wonder what other thoughts you might want to share with this reader, who I think is going through something many people are when we experience, as you and I have talked about, a crisis. It does throw us into this existential moment of, well, what needs to change? What is the purpose? What does this mean? So I'd love to hear what you'd say to our listener.
Well, first, I'm really sorry that this is happening. It's always a challenge when we have illness. And it's absolutely normal to be in a flux, because again, it's like this wasn't a rock that you saw on the pathway. And I can share some of my experience. For example, I remember when I was in the waiting room in the hospital, and I was talking to the ICU doctor, and his beeper went off, and I was getting an update status on my husband. And I don't know why I said, it's not my patient, it's not my husband, right? And he looks at me, and with his eyes, he tells me everything. He says, I have to go. And so here you have this rock now in the middle of the road.
Yeah.
And it's like, but I don't get rocks in my road. That's not supposed to happen to me.
Yeah.
Somebody else does. And I had actually this realization of like, I got the short end of the stick. How is it possible that I got this rod? Like it came actually to me. And that's so shocking. So I can understand the existential experience, because you're like, that's not the hot potato you want to have. And what I told myself is, I'm going to go into this moment. Like, this is what's required to me to go into this moment. And this moment, when you have an illness, of course, you have to, educate yourself. What's the health ramifications, what treatment is recommended, all of these things. And understand you have to go through that journey, which is incredibly difficult. And it does feel unfair, and it's kind of unfair. But then, when I talked to my mom after my husband died and I was crying, she's like, why are you crying? And I'm like, Mom, okay. It's like, what? And I said, I can't believe this happened to me. And my mom said, you know, you know, respectfully, why not you?
Hmm.
And I never felt self-pity again.
Hmm.
Because I realized that they're like huge challenges that happen to people all the time. All the time, something's happening that is really, really awful. And so, okay, this was mine. And this is when mine came, and this is how the package came. And like, we gotta unpack it, you know? And so, for this really, really challenging diagnosis, feel the feelings, find, she mentioned already that she's interested in what to do about it and find meaning. So that's already amazing. Like, you're already like, you don't feel it, but you're like halfway there,
Yeah.
because you're going into growth. You're going into transformation, reinvention, growth. What am I going to do about it? Okay, I know I have to do the treatment. I know all these implications of that. And then what's going to be the meaning around it? And so give yourself time to feel your feelings and to explore the fact, A, you want to grow from it. So that's amazing. And then B, what is it exactly that you want to? What does that growth or that purpose look like for you?
Yeah.
And you can start to sketch, and you can start to journal, and you can go for walks, and like, just like, go out there, write down whatever many things. One of the things before I decided to do this, I love football, meaning soccer. I love it. Like, I was a tomboy. I love it. My kids, and I wanted to be a football manager. I almost this close went to get the MBA for football management in Liverpool. Okay.
I love it.
So my friend was like, okay, write these things down and then you'll decide later, because she's like, this woman's crazy. So when you're going through this, and whatever it is, concert pianist, okay, great. I want to be a chef. Okay, great. Okay, I want to then help other women in doing this experience. Great. Just start to, because that's expansive, like, that opens up your possibilities. And then one of them is going to resonate more than the other, and then start reading about it, or maybe see a TED talk on it, or join a community about it, and then it starts to unfold. And be gentle with yourself. Like, you have to be gentle. You have to be ups and downs, and you just, as long as you're trending towards, is what matters. Not that you have a linear progression, but it's a trend.
That's a beautiful way of putting it. And I think one of the really important things in what you just said, but also thinking back through our conversation, is there's a lot of power in asking the questions.
Oh,
right? There's a
yes.
lot of
Yes.
power in just asking, I call them like questions of possibility, right? Like, what might be the sense of purpose for me from this experience, right? It's a question of possibility. It's a question of expansion. Or how could I grow from this? That's a question of expansion without having to have the XYZ answer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or knowing how to do it. I think it's just the power of asking those questions because, and you and I can geek out. We both love neuroscience. We can geek out on what happens in the brain, but it's all about our attention, right? We've all, heard the example. Actually, right now, think about a blue car, everyone. Okay. Think about a blue car. I promise you, if you really think about it right now, for the rest of the day, you're going to see a lot of blue cars, not because there's more blue cars, but because now you've told your brain to pay attention to blue cars, right? So when you ask these questions, you are telling your brain to pay attention to things that might be clues to the answer, just like the blue car. So I think that's a really, and again, Karen, now that I think about it, there were so many pivot points and moments where you asked yourself these questions of possibility without having any idea what the answer was.
Absolutely no idea. And one thing that I will recommend that I think is really helpful, ask yourself, how do I want to be? How
Mm-hmm.
do I want to feel like from this experience
Yeah.
maybe? So
Yeah.
if it's you don't know like what you want to do,
That's right.
how do I want to feel about it? So in my sense, I wanted to experience happiness in my life
Yeah.
and meaning in my life and those things. But for example, do you want to feel like you were kind or service or forgiving? Or so you can start to guide some of those
That's right.
actions
That's right.
towards the feelings that you want to feel on the other side of this
That's right.
experience.
I think that's really, really important. When I uh, mentor people through these reinventions, I do this exercise and I offer this to everyone listening where you envision your future self. You pick a time, a year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years from now, you pick a time and you begin with this question like, what do I want my inner experience to be like?
Mm,
Before you think about like later, we go through this whole flow and you envision your family and your social and your work. But the first question is, what do I want my inner experience to be like? Like the feelings I want to have, the beliefs I have, the stories I believe about myself. And it's just a really, for everyone, not even people, not just those going through a difficult time or a crisis. I think this is a really powerful thing for all of us to do on a regular basis. Because if we can be intentional about how we want our inner experience to be in the future, we can then be guided, as you were and are talking about, actions and conversations, and becomes a compass, like an inner compass. So I think that's a really great point. Karen, I think I could talk to you for roughly the next 17 days. And then we will syrup up all the internet power and all the Riverside
uh-oh.
recording power and we'll break it all, but I could do it. I am really grateful to you for not just your openness and your wisdom, Karen, but just this sense, and every time I talk to you, of this very actionable hopefulness that I feel. And not hope, because hope is just, I hope things will get better. Hopefulness has action in it. And like, I am so inspired by the way that you've lived things that you're talking about. Like there's nothing more inspiring or authentic. So thank you for being you. Thank you for sharing yourself with me and our listeners. And thank you for all the work that you do and the way that you bring yourself into the work that you do. It's, again, incredibly inspiring to witness and to hear like your inner experience that led you to create something so beautiful.
Thank you so much, Natalie. I feel so heard, and you've given me a space to be myself, and you've reflected beautifully the things that I said and didn't say, but you understood the context, and I really appreciate you for that. And it's always wonderful and inspiring to talk to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for tuning in. I do want to remind you that if you have a question that you want me or one of my guests to answer, please send it to me. My email is nataly@happier.com. It's Nataly @happier.com. Just put reinvention or reinventability in the subject line. And I may answer, or one of our guests will answer your question on the air. I will see you and hear you in our next episode.